ERS, that stands for Elite Recipe Source, not Easy Recipe Source, and not a new video every week source. It's all about quality over quantity here. This duck ragu I'm going to show y'all is, in my opinion, the perfect sauce for potato ricotta gnocchi, like the gnocchi I did a few videos ago. It's got a lot of meaty flavor from brown duck meat, duck stock, mushrooms, and a little wine to complement the potato and flour in the gnocchi. And the sauce also has a lot of tomato flavor that goes really well with the ricotta and Parmesan cheese that's also in that gnocchi recipe. That video recipe for the gnocchi will be linked in the end screen of this video, of course. And like that recipe, this one for the sauce is also pretty time consuming, but it's something that can be made in large batches and portioned out and frozen, and later on it's just a matter of reheating it for a relatively quick and easy meal. And the same can be said for the gnocchi. Step one here is to deal with the duck. I'm using a whole duck, one that I raised in my backyard pond, so it's kind of in between being totally wild and being store-bought. If you're using a store-bought duck, it's going to be more tender, of course, and so the amount of time you'll need to slow simmer this sauce is going to be a lot less with the store-bought bird. If you're using a wild shot duck or a backyard duck like I am, I highly recommend dry aging it a few days in the refrigerator, and I'll put a link in the description to a good video I found on that topic. So this duck I had also scalded in hot water and defeathered as best I could before dry aging, but there are still a few little feathers and hairy things here and there, as you can see. So I'm going to put the raw duck into a hot oven for a few minutes to help loosen those last stubborn feather pieces, as well as make the meat a little easier to separate from the bone. What I'm doing here is I'm deboning the whole duck, and as you can see here, the backbone I'd already separated out. I find this part easier to think of as liberating the bones from the meat, just following the bones and getting them out. And the bones that I'm getting out, in addition to that backbone, I'm putting in a large pot to make a duck stock that's going to be used later on in the sauce. For the vegetable prep, I'm going full mirepoix. I'm using celery, carrot, and onion. I'm going to grate the onion and the carrot, and I'm going to chop the celery really fine here. So this is what I've got for the mirepoix. I'm using some mushrooms too. I've got a mix of cremini and shiitake. I'm taking the stems off of the shiitake mushrooms. Those you can't really eat, they're too tough. And I'm going to throw those stems into the stock pot along with some trimmings from the other vegetables there too. And notice the mushrooms are going into their own bowl. They're not going in with the mirepoix or with anything else. They're going to be treated separately here. I'm going to start the stock pot on the main burner and turn it up until it gets to where it's simmering. Then I can move it on to one of the back burners. So with the stock pot simmering on a back burner, I've got my biggest saute pan on the main burner. That's where I'm going to be cooking the mushrooms and the duck and building and deglazing fawns on the bottom of that pan. I'm putting ladles full of stock as well as the fat that's sitting on the top of that stock into the saute pan. I'm going to start the mushrooms in the liquid, and my idea here is that the stock is going to evaporate and concentrate and get absorbed into the mushrooms. And then once that liquid is gone from the bottom of the pan, what will remain is the duck fat plus the mushrooms, which will have shed a lot of their own water and taken on some of the flavor of that reduced duck stock. It did take a few minutes to reduce down the liquid, and eventually I was able to saute those mushrooms and get a little browning on them. At the end of this, I threw in a little more stock to deglaze anything that might have been on the bottom, and then I emptied the pan of mushrooms into the bowl to keep them set aside. With a clean pan, I'm going to start searing that chopped duck meat in batches. Once I got some sear on this batch, I'm deglazing with the duck stock. I'm setting this batch of seared duck meat aside on that sheet pan. And again, with a cleaned out pan, I'm putting in the next batch of duck. I'm repeating the process and deglazing again with a few ladles full of duck stock. Then I'm going to do this one more time with the third and final batch of duck meat. When that's done browning, I'm going to empty that meat into the pile I've got going on the sheet tray. And I'm going to deglaze the saute pan with that finely cut mirepoix. The saute pan is going to be too small to put anything else in, so I'm getting it into a larger pot, which is where the sauce is going to be put together and slow cook. I'm putting in a few cloves of garlic and some more ladles of duck stock here. And in the meantime, remember that pot of duck stock has been simmering on another burner. And also remember that the sauteed duck meat and the sauteed mushrooms are sitting aside while I'm working on the contents of this pot, which is going to end up being the main pot that this sauce is going to be completed in. I'm adding here about a little more than a third of a bottle of cheap red wine. Later on, toward the end of the cooking, I'll add a little more wine as I'm adjusting flavors. Wine is one of those flavors that's relatively easy to adjust upward, along with the salt and the tomato. The big three flavors going on in this sauce are going to be a meaty flavor, a tomatoey flavor, and wine flavor. For the tomato, I'm using a couple of containers of Palmy tomato puree, which is just tomato with no peels and no seeds. Later on, I can adjust the tomato flavor upward, and I like to use the tomato paste, the double concentrated tomato paste in a tube for that. And of course, I'm rinsing out those tomato sauce containers with a little water and putting that in there. At this point here, I could still see chunks of carrot and celery in the sauce, even though I had chopped them really fine and they've been cooking for about 20 minutes total so far. So I decided to put the immersion blender in there to get everything smooth before adding in the duck meat and later on toward the end, the mushrooms. For the meaty flavor, you saw how I caramelized the chopped duck and the mushrooms and deglazed with duck stock. So the meaty flavor dial is already turned up as much as it can be. So finally here, I'm putting all that chopped duck meat into the sauce along with the juices and that reduced duck stock from deglazing the saute pan. And I'm going to rinse and scrape any goodies from the bottom of the sheet pan and put that in there too. And a little more duck stock in there. I'm also putting in the wings and some of the meatier bone pieces from the stock pot into the main pot of sauce. Remember, those pieces have had a big head start in that stock pot, so although the wing meat is tougher than the rest of the chopped meat to start with, it's had enough time to where it's more than caught up by now, and as it continues to cook in the sauce, it's going to make the sauce more gelatinous. Here I'm putting in some fresh herbs from the garden, some rosemary, sage, thyme, and oregano, and I'm wrapping it in cheesecloth and tying it up to make it easier to fish out at the end. From here, it's really just a matter of simmering until all the duck meat is tender, and of course I'm also tasting and adjusting flavor with salt, wine, and tomato. Like I said, I like to use the squeeze tubes of concentrated tomato paste for that. Now, how long it's going to take exactly for the meat to get tender is going to depend on the source of your bird. Mine simmered here for about 2 hours before I made that call. Last but not least, those mushrooms go in here to finish the sauce. And I really do think this sauce is the perfect match for potato ricotta gnocchi. If you like the cheesy red sauce Italian stuff like calzones or cheese ravioli with red sauce, and you also like slow braised meat dishes like bolognese or osso buco, then this duck ragu with potato ricotta gnocchi is the best of both of those worlds. And to get the best video recipes in the world, hit the subscribe button and check out the other videos on this channel like the one in the end screen here for that gnocchi recipe.